It's worse when you're doing laps in place and you bump into someone who's got no laps and they say, where are you going? You're going the wrong way. And you're like, time on the line. No, it's trying to do wherever.
He's got experience with it. He's doing the coast with his
Get cozy.
his band.
Oh, right. Hurdle up. Oh shit, we're on, that's weird. Just like I was watching the live stream and I saw myself and I was like, whoa. I can leave up on if you want.
Whatever. But this isn't taken.
No.
So if you don't mind, better.
Now I'm nervous. Now I'm seeing my head on another screen.
We're going to give 5 minutes because I've got like 6 people coming in. I know I'm coming. I'm just like obviously late. Alright. But it's from Liverpool, so it's fine. No, it's sorry, they're from Liverpool.
Yeah, come some.
Yeah, well, these people you see 7 o'clock and then you just think, oh, that's like a roundabout time. Can't get the crowd.
You'll just trickle in now.
Yeah. Well, that's what, the last time there was no one here, and they like turned around and like BAM! Places and that. So I'm like, now I'm being considerate. This is how far you push that before people start thinking this is awesome. Excuse me. We could do the thing where we clap them in, like,
yeah?
Wrong time. There it is, wrong standard. Welcome to wrong standard. I just said we're waiting for like a few people, so I'll be kind. Yeah, lots of space in some way. Ashley.
You have a class, you have some of this wine.
See you on live stream.
What? You want to sit
No, you can sit down.
Oh, take the first there.
That's loud.
Yeah. Now, hi. Stop.
I was just wondering if that was what a glass tube.
Just very casual at this. Hello, everyone. I did last time. I did like a dance, and I can't explain when I do introductions. Just do one stupid thing, like squeaky voice, or like you know. Anyway, welcome one and all. So these talks will eventually be part of our huge, amazing program in a new space behind Islington Mill in the big warehouse, which we're opening at the end of next month. Woo! Woo! There we go. Crowd participation starting off well. But before that, we brought in a few people who we worked with last year at projects over in Rogue Studios to talk for us and give us a bit of like, hey ho. So Lauren did a project with us last April, Black and Rogue Project Space, which was an accumulative group show where like one artist was added every week. Lauren came up with this, it was kind of like a mini residency in the space practically.
Very mini.
Very mini, it was like a couple of days and she had no material, so just kind of flung herself at it. Graduated from Slade 2012, Art Review Future Greats 2013. Sorry, do I have? No, I shouldn't mention that. That means you're great now, because you was like,
Yeah.
anyway.
When does that come true?
I don't know. Now, Lauren, now you're here.
Thanks, Steve.
Last year in the summer, she was part of a residency at Kingsgate in North London, which accumulated in a show there, Entreé, Slade Black, and lots of other bits and bobs, which she'll tell us about very soon.
Thanks.
You can start now.
Thank you.
I'll chip in with this. Actually, you can start me,
Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. As Steve explained, I was here about this time last year doing a very small residency consisting of 2 days, and I kind of, maybe I misunderstood the invitation, but I thought I was supposed to make all the work here and now, and only use materials that I could find in the vicinity. So that's what I did, and it was a really nice challenge actually, because it meant that I had to kind of be quite resourceful with what I had, and Dean had lots of interesting bits of glass which I shattered by mistake by drilling into it. Never ever drill into
IKEA
shelving. A lot of people probably know that, but it's toughened glass, and if you pierce the outside then the whole thing shatters, which we found out the hard way. But I've started with just putting a couple of pictures of that show. So this is the install of that show. It's called Totemic, Polemic, Olive, and it was we've got 4 artists in it, and my work, you can see a piece there, it's this green piece, and then one at the back there, and there's a little wiggly leg near that bike, and something in the back there. I've put one close-up of one work, so that you can see. This is kind of the preamble to the show that I'm going to talk mostly about. So I began by, I was really interested at the time in modular furniture and things that could kind of fold out and appear and disappear. So I made a series of folding out parts that could pack away and re-emerge, but using quite strange processes. So obviously this one's propped with a wine bottle that's open, and then it would form a complete table when it was put together. So it was kind of a bar, which could fold away. So I used the residency with Dean as a kind of testing ground for a series of works that I was thinking about while I was on this other residency, which lasted 6 months, at a place called Kingsgate Workshops in North London, and it consisted of having a studio. I was really lucky. I got something went wrong with the studio that I was supposed to have, so I ended up having this enormous space, which ended up being the gallery space that I used. So it was like a very lucky setup. Basically, I had a big studio for 6 months, so I made some big work. And this quote was the premise that I applied for the residency with. So I wanted to think about a way of considering a menu being a script of some kind, as a series of instructions or a series of choices that could be made, a sort of selection process that goes on, and then this kind of theatrical aspect of a recipe being a scene. So I spent the whole time kind of investigating that while I was there, and this quote comes from it's the last sentence in an A.A. Gill article. He's the writer for the Sunday Times. He's a food writer, and he's kind of a dubious character, but I've always been really interested in the way he writes, because it's very expressive and quite off-topic from the restaurant that he's reviewing, and I find that quite an interesting model to apply to artwork, and also talking about artwork as a kind of backdoor into it. So kind of talking around the topic, I guess, rather than directly diving in. So this was the kind of impetus, the jumping board for this thing. So the show, I'm going to talk about 3 kind of recent projects that happened since Dean's show, and mostly at the end of last year. So this show happened in June, and it was entitled Entreé, Stage Left, which is kind of a pun. Quite interested in the use of puns, the cringe of a pun, and the play of language. A lot of the time my work uses language in a way that's what am I interested in? I'm interested in language and the way that it can be. In fact, I'm being the perfect example right now. When language fails and you can't find the words to say what you want to say, that's exactly what I'm interested in, which is embodying itself. So yeah, Entreé stage left. So I was thinking about this theatre space, set changes, a kind of theatrical scenery, a staging of a moment. So this show was supposed to be a series of three. It's in 3 parts. So there was a starter, a main, and dessert. It was kind of a 3-act play. So this is the starter. So as you came into the space, you would a lot of the works were kind of packed away. The tables folded up. This piece over here, kind of facing the wall. I'd been researching or looking at, showing a huge interest in the Memphis group, which is an 80s design movement. And I saw some pictures of an exhibition that they'd done of their furniture, and all of the furniture was pushed up against the walls, and it was in a kind of white cube gallery space, and I was interested in the fact that it looked like sculpture, but it was shown like furniture, kind of rigid and a bit mute or something. So I wanted to attempt to make the sculptures have this kind of potentiality of being used, this kind of mute waiting space where they're packed by the walls. So this was the starter. This is the main course. So over the course of the exhibition, if you went to visit it, you could request from the invigilator to change it to whatever course you wanted. At the time when I was working on the show, I was going to see a lot of theatre, and I saw one particular play where there was a really nice scene change, and it was that moment where the lights sort of dim but only slightly, and you can see the stagehands come out wearing all black and their mouthpieces, and they sort of move the things around in such a way that you're not really meant to know what they're doing, but I really enjoyed watching that happen, and this kind of shift, quite a sculptural shift of putting this thing there and taking that one away. And the different modes that theatre designers come up with to do that. But I suppose I was going down quite a generic route for that, in order for it not to overcomplicate. So this was the main course, so as you can see the tables have come down and some things have shifted. There's a new item here, and this bottle. And then I'll show you the dessert, finally. So, yeah, again, quite a lot happens in the dessert, actually. I was kind of, when thinking about how to approach the starter, main and dessert, I wanted to think through what role they play in a series of, in the course of a meal, and when a the sort of anticipation of a starter, the kind of palate preparing, the feeling of having this light thing that's preparing you for the next course. The main is kind of quite straight up, I guess, quite stodgy there. It's very simple, sort of straight on. And then the dessert is kind of the party bit, where everything comes out to play, and you've got a bit of sweetness and light going on. So in a nutshell, that was kind of the beginning approach of the show. Just before I got the residency, the residency started on the 1st of January, and over Christmas I was watching White Christmas, as you do, and there was this beautiful scene, which I'm going to show you a little bit of. It sounds quite quiet, but you can just watch
theater, especially where dancing is concerned. Chat, tat, aren't tapping anymore. They do choreography. Chicks, who did kicks, aren't kicking anymore. They're doing choreography. Heads, who did steps, that would stop the show in days that used to be. Through the air they keep flying, like a duck that is dying. Instead of dance, it's choreography.
Interested in this kind of the spectacle of this moment, this hamminess, this kind of absurdity. It's quite incongruous with the rest of the film, which was quite common at this time in cinema in the 50s, where there was this kind of absolute adoration for the new Technicolor, and anything that could show it off would be an exciting addition to a film. So I was also interested in this moment in film when it was very close to theatre, and where it's sort of that was how they staged, how they posed what went on in the film. So the space was intended to be a kind of theatrical immersion in a restaurant, and my vision for it was that it was going to be this kind of classy exploration of 50s cinema meets 80s Memphis meets a kind of contemporary gourmet restaurant. But actually it ended up being more McDonald's in kind of mood because of these bright colours, and you don't really see them in restaurants. But that ended up being, it wasn't an intention, but I was interested in the dilemma of the fact that using bright colours in restaurants doesn't really make it very classy. Obviously I laid out the space to kind of emulate this White Christmas scene, and that was the big impetus. It was kind of the niggling thing that stayed with me throughout the residency, and it needed to stay in the show. So I did this in order to enact the scene changing and the starter, main and dessert transference, I worked with a dancer called Aisling Cook to make a choreography of sculptural movements so that she could enact these spaces. So I'll play a short clip from that now. It's got no sound, this one. So my instruction to Aisling was that she had to be somewhere between a canapé waiter and Audrey Hepburn in a film called Funny Face, which I'll talk a bit more about later, where she claims this cafe space by dancing in it. And I wanted this empowerment of somebody being able to kind of move through space in a way that had strength, but also be somehow subservient or performing a job that needed to be carried out. So I've got just a few photos of individual works from the show. Humour is really important in my work. The bit with the wine bottle coming down is meant to be quite funny. It was very funny in real life, and it's quite funny with sound. Didn't go down so well tonight. But that moment is sort of this tension, this kind of, obviously you see this bottle kind of hanging in the ceiling and you know that something is going to happen with that movement. And I'm interested in that, in work holding that potentiality, waiting to be moved. A lot of my work when I was studying at the Slade was, it would start where I would have an idea for a performance that needed some sculptures to be part of it, or a surface, a floor surface to perform on, or some kind of space. And then I would tend to work backwards and remove the performance part, because it ended up being less important to actually enact them. And I think that's something that I'm still working through and working with, is this this moment where something needs to be performed and when it doesn't, and perhaps sometimes it's best to let the sculpture do the performing itself, I guess. So I'll just run through a few. This was a piece called Host. It had wheels on the back and it could be moved around. It had a little light in there which lit up this area, which has a glass inside. It's quite hard to see, with a sandblasted front to the glass. In this place where the residency was, there's a really amazing selection of artists who were working there already, and it had been there for 30 years, this building, and most of the artists had been there for that long, and so there were lots of people with really amazing craft that were working there. And I met this one woman who was a glass artist, and she had a sandblasting machine. And it was a really serendipitous moment because I'd written on a piece of paper before I met her, and I stuck it to the wall, "Sandblast glass!" And then she came into my studio and said, we were just chatting, and I squeezed out of her that she had a sandblasting machine, and I pointed at this sign. I was like, can I? And she let me use her sandblasting machine a lot. So that was a really nice kind of new process that I learnt and also got to experiment with. This is a piece called "A Menu is a Script, a Recipe, a Scene," which you might recognise from the beginning of the talk. It's based on a piece of design called U10 Silo, which is a sort of plastic rectangle with vacuum formed sort of slots that you can put your toothbrushes and creams in, or your pencils and pens. And I was interested in flattening that and having a kind of image of that design icon. A lot of the time my work explores design and tries to claim design by remaking it myself, which is partly a process of wanting to own that thing and not being able to, and partly a process of wanting to understand it more by going through the motions of drawing it. I guess it's like going to a museum and drawing a picture of a painting that you like, but it's kind of having it myself by making my own version of it. That happens quite a lot in my work. This is a piece. Actually, it's good that you mentioned the Future Greats, Dean, because this is kind of an embarrassing bare-all piece where I think the quality of the images isn't good enough, but this is the back of that piece that I just showed you, and it's called Ivy and Bob. So for that Future Greats event, we went for a meal at the Ivy, which was like ridiculous lifelong dream of mine. The Ivy's like a posh restaurant in London which was really big in the 90s. A lot of people would get packed there, kind of stumbling out, Kate Moss, etc. in the heyday of the 90s. And so getting to go there was a real kind of strange phenomenon for me, and I kept this menu that we got given and displayed it in this work, which is kind of a collage of these two restaurants, kind of imagining some sort of romance between them. There's another restaurant called Bob Ricard, so it's this kind of meeting of Ivy and Bob. And I exposed the menu on the back, and it says the Art Review Future Greats. And then at the end of this exhibition we enacted the meal again, so I got a friend of mine who's a chef to cook the meal that we had, so it's like an embarrassing obsession. I even invited someone that had been there originally, and I think he was a bit creeped. On the top there's a selection of pasta. The images are really low quality on here, I'm sorry about that. This is the Leaning Tower of Pisa and the Duomo and the Leaning Tower of Pisa again. And this has a sandblasted front, kind of smear, as though it's like a dirty display cabinet. This work was another work in the show, which was a series of tablecloths. More on that later. I'll just flick through these ones so you can see them. This is a bar called Chef Peep, and it's kind of this height, and it's supposed to be, well, I don't know if it was supposed to be, it turned out to be child height, so it's almost like a child's bar, and it was, at the time when I made it, I was interested in italicising things as a way of emphasising them harder, and thinking about language and image, and applying the same logic of italicising text to emphasise it to an image. And I was talking to somebody about this, and she said, well then surely the Leaning Tower of Pisa is the ultimate tower, because it's italicized, and I thought that was a really beautiful notion. So I sort of explored this idea of italicizing a ziggurat shape and kind of offsetting something, and yeah, I guess it's an ongoing interest. This is a work with a very long title, which I've forgotten, but it's based on the steps in the film that I showed you, and hieroglyphic images. I've been about 4 years ago. I made a hieroglyph alphabet of pasta shapes, which was supposed to kind of draw this parallel to something that goes in the mouth and something that comes out of the mouth, or a kind of written and spoken text, and pasta as a sort of perfect distillation of a letter. And I was thinking about the rules around pasta as a parallel to the rules around language. So in Italian culture, there's a lot of rules about what you could put with what sauce, what shape of pasta goes with what sauce. So going back to how I wanted the dancer to be in this performance for Kingsgate Workshops, I was thinking about this particular scene in Funny Face, which is a film from I think 1954 starring Audrey Hepburn. It's a slightly dubious story. She's a librarian in Paris, and a sort of Vogue equivalent photographer comes in to shoot a photo shoot, and she's being very angry and annoying about the fact that they're there, and she's sort of this quite stereotypical bookish character. And then of course Fred Astaire, who plays the photographer, sees that she's the most beautiful person in the room and she should actually be the model, and they ask her to come to Paris. And the only reason she says yes is because she's dreaming of meeting the philosophers and thinkers who occupy the dive bars of Paris at the time. And so she goes, but she runs away from the photo shoot and finds herself in this dive bar. And this is a moment where she kind of claims the space and expresses herself. I won't play the whole clip, but there's So as a teenager, I had an obsession with this film, and I did a lot of dancing, and it sounds really pretentious, but I discovered contemporary dance, and when I was about 15 or 16, and I used to go wearing the full black polo neck and saw myself as the Audrey Hepburn. Sadly, my life took a different turn, and I did not go on to embody that, but it's still an interest that remains. And I was invited to do a performance at Nottingham Contemporary last year in November, and the space was this really amazing, it's called The Space at Nottingham Contemporary, and it's a huge kind of theatrical space that has a sprung floor and a huge, enormous lighting rig, big projection, amazing sound system. And so I wanted to do something that would really embrace all of those elements. And I thought it would be nice to fill the space with a selection of tables with tablecloths so that all of the audience members would sit at round tables. And I was thinking about that as kind of like an awards ceremony when people are all sat around tables but they're looking at a stage. So it's kind of a place where the theatre and the restaurant collide. And I asked an artist who also dances, called Alice Gale Feeney, to work with me to make this series of dances where actors dance in cafes, basically. So there were 3 parts to this. There was kind of 5 parts to this performance, but it was separated by 3 dances. So she began by dancing along with Bon Dapart, the Godard film, where Anna Karina dances in this cafe. As a process of kind of claiming space, I wanted her to have this. Again, she was kind of being a similar character to the one in the previous performance, where she was being somewhere between a waiter and a performer. She performed the dances as though she was learning them as it went. So this performance was kind of about a process of trial and error and kind of attempt to do something. And it all came from this particular interest in a particular object that my parents had, which is a thing called a puzzle jug. Here she is pouring some Orangina into the puzzle jug. So for those that don't know, a puzzle jug is like a 17th century pub game, and it's a ceramic jug that has holes in the sides of the jug, and in this case spikes around the top, and a tube, a kind of straw around the outside with lots of spouts coming off it. And in order to be able to drink from the jug, because if you tip it you would just cover yourself in liquid, you have to work out how to cover up the holes on the top, and the liquid comes up through the handle of the jug. So it's kind of a trick, and they always come with this poem on the side that says, if you spill, you're going to look like an idiot, but in better rhyming way. And that was the idea, that you'd kind of get caught out. So I got Alice to drink from the jug for the first time on this performance night, so she didn't know how to use it. So again, it was like this kind of moment of tension and trial and error. She was approaching this object anew. So here she is drinking from it. She actually did it quite quickly. I think she might have looked it up on Wikipedia how to do it. But it was so that was kind of this moment of reflection, and then she danced along with Uma Thurman and John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. It's a very different vibe to the previous one, but Quentin Tarantino did take inspiration from the Bon Dapart one. So it's not a new idea to kind of combine these two things. There she is. And then her next job was to hand out Orangina to people at the tables, but there wasn't enough Orangina to go around, so intentionally. So so only some people got Orangina, and then she would hand out a tube. So I wanted to draw a kind of liquid line through the audience and turn the whole audience into a puzzle jug. This kind of confusion of whose tube goes where and who's drinking from which. And there was this sort of moment of receiving the Orangina and people looking kind of pleased that they got one, but then finding out that it wasn't them that would get to drink it. It was kind of around the other side of the table. So there was this sort of play on what happened in that restaurant setting and this kind of intimacy that went on, and there was quite a lot of animosity towards the Orangina. People thought it might have been spiked in some way because they were already open, which I hadn't anticipated, but it was an interesting angle. So here's the Orangina being handed out and a brave girl drinking from it. And then finally she danced to the Audrey Hepburn scene that I just showed you, which is kind of meant to be the climax, I guess. They gradually got wilder, and she was very good at flinging herself around in a really nice way. And I think I was going to talk about one more thing, but I think maybe time is a bit tight. What do you want to hear? I could do it quite quickly, this final section.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
5 minute rush.
Oh, what?
Throw it out.
Okay. I'll just have a bit of water.
Prepare yourself.
I'll let you watch this while I have some water. Oops.
I was like a prepared interlude, did you say?
Okay, so I was asked by Alice Cretney at Turf Projects to curate a show, and the premise that I came up with for the show, or the title that I came up with for the show, was Art in Restaurants is on the same level as Food in Museums - Niles Crane. And it's a quote from Niles Crane in Frasier, where it's from an episode where Niles and Frasier go to a restaurant with their dad, and they, in order to get the best table, they kind of wax lyrical about the artwork to the host of the restaurant, and he gives them a table, but their dad, not knowing the kind of ins and outs of it, thinks that they really like the paintings, and as a treat for them buys them a painting from the restaurant, but they're really ugly, kind of, I don't know, they're like a bullfighter or something, but it's very like aggressive and painterly, and it's really not Niles and Frasier style. I enjoyed the pomposity of this quote, and as a sort of premise for a show that could again occupy this space between the art gallery and the restaurant, and maybe putting on an exhibition that would be simultaneously a kind of props for food, sort of art that is present just to kind of support the enjoyment of eating, and maybe to subvert the myth that art in restaurants is on the same level as food in museums. So I commissioned, or I invited a sign painter called Bella Pace to make a sign for the restaurant. In Frasier, the restaurant is called Le Cigare Volant, so she made this beautiful hand-painted sign. And then this is an Amanda Ross Ho work in the window. It's two enormous, yeah, you can tell the scale. They're enormous wine glasses, and it was very kind of humorous in the window of a Croydon art gallery to have these kind of huge wine glasses, and they're filled with resin. And this is just another install shot. So I had a couple of tables in the restaurant, the window table, and then 2 others. Each had work on the tables. These are the artists that were involved in the show. So I wanted to invite a selection of artists that kind of went from emerging to dead. So we had everyone from people I knew to people I've been kind of worshipping for some time. So Ettore Sotsas is the dead one, sadly. And there's lots of kind of more established artists who are still alive, thank goodness. This is Ettore Sotsas's cutlery that he made for Alessi. It's called Nuovo Milano. I wanted to have it in the exhibition because I wanted to celebrate the cutlery as an artwork rather than as a museum piece or as sort of by-the-by eating implement. So we had the entire collection then from the Alessi Museum and laid it out in a kind of formation on this table. And behind it is a hat, a chef's hat with an embroidery made by Alex Frenchley. It was actually a birthday present for me. So it's in my own personal collection. And it's it's a sort of embroidered chef's hat. This was a work by Eric Benjamins, who's an American artist. He lives in LA, and he made 3 works for the show. There was a sound piece which played a very slow clock. He'd done a residency in Santa Fe, and he was reacting to their motto for the town, for the place, was La Tierra del Mañana, which means the land of tomorrow, and he took it to mean this kind of, yeah, we'll do it tomorrow kind of thing. So all of the work had this kind of laziness, and this is a menu card for a series of recipes or comments. It's kind of texts in response to this, and he made this cutting board, which was the mayor of Santa Fe's handwriting saying mañana, and the clock sound would play a kind of steel guitar, but it would always be kind of 2 or 3 minutes late on the hour every hour, so there was this sort of laziness to the space. This is some work by George Little. I think these are really beautiful, kind of painting sculptures. I always feel weird talking about someone else's work because I feel like I'm putting words in their mouth that that they might not want. But for me, they occupy an interesting space that I'm interested in with this fold-out kind of thing. I feel like our work has quite a lot of parallels, so I've had a long interest in his work. There's some paintings of his as well. These are 2 plate works by Simon de Bro-Muller. I've probably said his name in a really horrific way, but he's a Danish artist living in Berlin, and he makes this series of plates which are very hard to tell whether the food is real or not. This is another work of Simon de Bro-Muller's called Beer and Piss. I'm not entirely sure if he made it at the moment. One of them's beer, one of them's piss. I don't know whether they're directly related to one another. This is some paintings by Alex Frenchley. This one is of a kind of Roman triad of seating where people would lie down to eat so they could fit more food in. And this is another painting by Alex Frenchley. Some work by Celine Condarelli and Catherine Bohm, who runs a drinks company called Company Drinks. She gets it's a kind of community project where she gets people to pick hops to make beer and berries to make juice, and we sold the drinks, and she had this shelf there, so it was a kind of, you could drink while you went around the show. And finally, this is a work by Bruce McLean, which is probably my all-time favourite artwork ever. I was really chuffed that he agreed to be on the show. It's a video, you can actually see it on YouTube. I didn't feel it was appropriate for me to show it in my talk since it's not my work, but it's really special. It's him and a lady having dinner, and they get served a series of cutouts of sculptures, and he gets very angry and mutters the whole time and swears a lot, and there's some very beautiful kind of poised moments. And there's your dessert. Thank you very much.
I've got a burning question.
Go on.
No, it's not burning. I'm waiting on him to say this, but I was thinking. I won't bring anything that's not been spoke about, but cause I know you work with Anthony Hamilton. People do, I don't know. And the idea that we work in Manchester and like a lot of people don't have access to that kind of like higher end artists working with, in studio work. I was thinking like kind of your, cause, I mean like Rebecca who read it last month works for Damon Hirst, but that's really not, it's just like a job. And, we all have jobs, and we can, but like yours and her work kind of sits at a level that's quite similar. And I've spoken about you and Anthony and Hannah Martin as well, and there's a lineage there. I'm just thinking that how does that impede, or does that kind of help your work with it, or is that something that you get stuff out of working with artists on that capacity? My because obviously you did the talk with her at Kingsgate.
I invited her to.
I brought it in.
So I work as an assistant for Anthony Hamilton, who's a sculptor, and I've been doing it for 3 years or so, 4 years maybe, and it's a really special relationship, I guess. It's quite, when it's just one-on-one, it's just the two of us, it's quite, I suppose we are very tuned into each other, and so I invited her to do an in-conversation with me at the Kingsgate exhibition, which was really nice because she'd kind of seen the work come through just our casual chats, so she knew where it's coming from. In terms of, you were kind of asking if it's difficult, like the influence.
Yeah.
I think it's not. It's hard to say. I guess it's something that I'm aware of, and when I first started working for her, I had to be conscious that I wasn't kind of taking her work to my studio, or giving too much of my work to her. But I think we've found a kind of, I really respect what she does, and I enjoy learning a lot from being near her and observing the way that she works, obviously on a much bigger scale than me. So in that sense, I'm kind of learning and building all the time. I don't feel like there's a conflict of interests, really. It's good, we just chat. It's like doing a tutorial all the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't mention the tutorial she had.
Oh yeah, not so well, not so good. Yeah, any other questions or comments? Are you hungry?
Just wanted to ask a little bit, like the space between the restaurant and the art gallery, and how do you see those two things kind of as they're very different kinds of spaces, really, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely.
Almost opposites, and I guess in some ways you're kind of creating like sort of dining spaces that people would look at as an image but not necessarily inhabit in a way.
I think I'm interested in the fact that the work could be inhabited. I found it kind of complicated in this Turf Project exhibition because I pointedly didn't want it to become a restaurant. I think I needed to explore to take out the gimmick element if it had been a restaurant, and to explore the idea of it having its own new space in between the two, maybe. In a way, I think it was the first time I've kind of curated something in a formal sense, and I think I made a much more conventional show than I anticipated making. But I think that had a lot to do with the fact that I'd just done the Kingsgate exhibition, and where I'd sort of thrown, it was like every surface was painted, every aspect was kind of busy and loud and all me. And I think I thought I needed to, as a curator, which I'm not, I was just asked to do that, I felt I didn't want to overpower the work by being too immersive or having too much of a voice, or covering it in too much of my stuff. So I went down the quite gallery route. I think it's something that I'm still exploring in a way.
Where would you see it in relation to, let's say, something like food, the Gordon Bar, which is like a restaurant?
I think where would I see it in relation to it? I think this exhibition was quite different. I'm really interested in those moments where artists have made food and that kind of relational thing that obviously came after. I think whenever I've tried to do it, I haven't pitched it right. I found it a bit, it's a complex thing, giving people food in a gallery, and I've found it to have lots of similar, kind of in the way that the Orangina was misinterpreted to be some kind of trap. There's like an issue with generosity that goes on, where you're giving people something and they feel that they owe you something back, and people don't quite want to engage with that. And I find that really interesting, but I've not worked out how I can own that yet.
The awkwardness is kind of good, isn't it?
Yeah.
It becomes, the rules of the restaurant become really awkward in the gallery, in a way.
Yeah, definitely, and much more performative. I guess in each of those spaces there's ways to act and ways not to act, and I'm interested in etiquette and the way that you're expected to act when you receive food, and the way that you're expected to walk around a gallery and observe it. I think I haven't cracked that yet, but it's something that's still meandering. Anything else? Peaches are stopping.
I just wondered how you came to the decision to not have any sound in one of the film pieces, one of the early ones, when your sources are full of sound.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In terms of the video itself, there will be ambient sound at some point once I need to record the Foley sound, because the room was very echoey, so it came out really horrible. In terms of sound, as in like accompanying music, it's something that for this exhibition it didn't feel necessary. The performance took place at the opening and only at the opening, so there was a lot of people, and it was very, very different because she obviously had to kind of force her way through the crowds. Sort of, as a canapé waiter might do, she had to kind of state her presence by moving across people. And the ambient sound, the squeaks of the movements, this bottle coming down, it was all about that like thud moment where it was kind of important that you could observe all of that. And maybe the true answer is I just didn't know what the right sound was, short of stealing some sound from something else, or appropriating, perhaps the correct word to use. I didn't feel that there was something that felt right for that. So
Maybe the senses were engaged with the movement.
yeah. I've been using this, these elements, this bit and the one at the beginning and the one in the middle, are commissioned work for an exhibition that's in a couple of weeks in a space called Safe House in Peckham, and I was invited to make an ident for the screen. So it's a film screening, and they wanted to have something to occupy the screen in the time between the actual screening. It was kind of a peculiar request, because it's kind of asking me to make something that's not a thing in a way, like the sort of non-space, I guess, of the screen. So I decided to have these screensavers that would kind of make this intermingling of food ingredients to make a certain dish. And I was thinking about what sound to play to that, and selected this Coleman Hawkins album, which I tried to play at the beginning of this, but it seemed a bit too sort of, it was before most people arrived, but it was a bit sort of seducey somehow. It set the wrong tone. But what I'm interested in about that particular album is that it's slightly a long story, but my dad used to own an art gallery, like a craft gallery, that sold prints and paintings and jewellery and things in my hometown. And he was having an artist over for dinner who used to be a jazz musician, and he was really nervous about this artist coming round because he really liked him, and he went out and bought this jazz album to sort of impress him on this night that he was coming around for dinner. And so I always associate it with a kind of impressive artist's dinner, and I wanted so for this work I'm going to have this Coleman Hawkins music that kind of sets the scene for a meal. But in terms of music to performance, I've not quite worked that level out yet. Anything else before we eat some actual food? I brought an enormous Dutch ginger cake because I came from Holland this morning. I was visiting a friend I make a series of books, which I've brought just in case you want to look at them. You can browse the books. I collaborate with a friend to make these books called Her Eyes and My Voice, under pseudonym Vanessa Visual and Virginia Verbal. So we're kind of we're both characters, and the books are kind of, I guess it's the closest I came to curating before I did this curating show. We invite people to respond to a title with image or text, poems, all sorts, and produce these books. And we're working on the 4th issue at the moment, which is why I was in Holland, and hence why I've got a Dutch cake. So I'll put these on here and you can have a look if you fancy.
Should we wrap?
Yeah.
We'll have potluck dinner in here.